Hello and welcome to Envisioning 2050. I am Osama Nizamani. Creating a better future without addressing people's socioeconomic needs remains a meaningless endeavor. Between 21 to 24% of our population lives below the national poverty line. Similarly, the average GDP per capita of our population is somewhere around 1,200 US dollars, which is almost $800 short of the regional average, which is 1,900 US dollars. To discuss on this, my guest is someone who was among BBC's 100 Women in 2020. She's also someone who has quite a distinguished background in health policy. My guest today is none other than Senator Dr. Sania Nishtar. Senator Dr. Sania Nishtar, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I want to start off our discussion by asking you, how has the entire journey been for you, starting as a child to then as a distinguished medical student to a health policy expert? How was that first phase of transition for you?
Well, I was born and I grew up in Peshawar, and I was very inclined towards sports when I was a child. I was a good swimmer. I started playing golf at the age of 9.
Interesting.
But then my father passed away when I was 15. And after that, I started focusing a lot more on my studies. And I did well in medical school. Then I got married. I had 2 children. There was a period during my life when I was totally focused on family life and raising my children. And subsequently, then I started on an accelerated path to complete my postgraduate studies. I became Pakistan's first woman cardiologist. And then there was another incident in my life where I discovered that cardiology is not what I want to pursue for the rest of my life. So at that point, I developed a small NGO aimed at creating public awareness. And then that took me to a very different journey.
I see.
There was an incident I recall once I was in the hospital and we got a circular saying that we could no more use new catheters for people who could not pay, that we had to wash them and use them for poor people. And apparently it was a very small notification, which must have meant something very ordinary for anyone else, but that was a true inflection point in my life. And I told myself, that is not what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Treat the rich in a very different way and the poor in a very different way. And to clarify, I used to work in the cardiac catheterization laboratory.
I see.
So I would stand and do angiographies the entire day. This is a procedure where you put a catheter into somebody's heart, inject a dye, and see if the arteries are blocked. And for that, you require disposables. These are like tubes. And you have to open a new set for every patient because they're sterilized in a certain way and you can't reuse them.
So you were asked to use non-sterilized ones for the ones who could not afford it?
Well, not non-sterilized, but the hospital asked us to reuse them.
Would that be safe?
After sterilizing them.
Okay.
They said the hospital doesn't have enough money, so you need to use new ones for those who can pay, and you can just put them in disinfectant and use them for people who can't pay.
Right.
And as I said earlier, that was a moment of great introspection. And I told myself, I'm not going to do that for the rest of my life. Treat the rich in a very different way, the poor in a very different way. So I started on a journey. And that journey has taken me from hospitals to boardrooms, from founding civil grassroots institutions to a ministerial role, from the bedside to chairing multilateral initiatives. It's been a long journey for me.
Right. And then how was it when you shifted, say, from the health policy, from working as a health policy expert to as a full-time special assistant to Prime Minister, especially on poverty alleviation? How was that transition for you, and how did you feel in terms of bringing along your previous experience and then harnessing it for your current job or current assignment?
So, I mean, when I transitioned from being a clinician to a person with more of a public health orientation, my focus was on health systems, in terms of the subject discipline. And in health systems, I got more and more drawn to social protection centered around health. And I developed a number of different models as well, and operationalized them at a smaller scale. Models that were centered on protecting people against catastrophic health expenditures. So, of course, I had my academic work and my research work and other intellectual pursuits. And during this period of time when I was focused on public health purely, I was working with a number of different international agencies in different capacities, chairing initiatives, being part of working groups and task forces, leading studies. But then, in terms of my core interest, was systems to protect against catastrophic health expenditure. So that interest continued to develop. And I set up, as I mentioned, pilot and demonstration projects. In fact, my Global Innovation Award that I got from the Rockefeller Foundation was for work around such a model that I had developed when I was running a civil society organization. So clearly that bent of mind, that interest, that inclination, that subject interest was there, which straddled me at the intersection of health and social protection. So when I got an invitation to serve in Prime Minister Imran Khan's administration, I accepted.
Right, and there's also one, I must say, there are a few least unknown knowns about you. The first being is that you are quite extensively published author. You have, I think, 6 books to your credit, and then you also happen to have about 116 research publications. And then at the same time, you're also chairing the UN's university, especially the Institute for Global Health, if I have it correctly, in Malaysia. So how is this, or how are you actually managing these two Herculean tasks? On one end, you are a full-time SAPM on the Poverty Alleviation and Social Safety Division, and then at the same time, you're also chairing another university. How does it feel for you to manage these two tasks?
So, to clarify, the initiative that you referred to is I'm chairing the advisory board of that initiative.
I see.
Which means 2 meetings every year.
Okay.
Previously, those meetings used to be face-to-face, which meant a commitment of less than a week over a year, 3 days at a time. Mm-hmm. But since COVID, most of the interactions are virtual. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't pose a significant time, there isn't much of a time constraint. But also to clarify, over the last 20 years, I've been involved with many international organizations and initiatives, the World Health Organization more than any other, various agencies of the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the Clinton Global Initiative, and I've played various roles. I've chaired committees for them. I've been part of task forces. I've chaired a study for the National Academy of Sciences for the US. And whenever you are in such a role, this is not full-time employment. When I joined as the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, prior to that I stepped down from many initiatives and boards and commitments within the country. And I also stepped down from many, at that time I was chair of the WHO's High-Level Commission on Non-Communicable Diseases. And I co-chaired that with the presidents of Uruguay, Finland, and Sri Lanka. and our fifth co-chair was the health minister of Russia. So I was then the serving co-chair of, and that was pretty intensive in terms of coming up with various reports and analytic positions drawn on complex analyses. And when that term finished back in 2019, since then I have not taken on another major international role, because my commitment to my present role within the country is, of course, 100%. So I've really stepped back from my international work since I've...
And I was also reading through your CV, and you perhaps vacated the chairpersonship of another committee, perhaps, and that was to avoid conflict of interest. What prompted that?
Conflict of interest?
You actually mentioned that in your CV. In order to avoid conflict of interest, you vacated the chairpersonship for that committee.
Well, when I don't exactly recall which one you are referring to, but when I accepted to serve as the SAPM, I stepped down from many initiatives.
I see.
And it may well have been that in one there was a potential perceived conflict of interest, which was the motivation. In cases of some, it was the perceived and potential conflict of interest. In others, it was the sheer volume of work, because I knew I was not going to be able to do justice. Recently, I've also stepped down from the board of the organization that I've founded, because I don't think I can do them justice. I'm giving them no time. I don't have either the ability to fundraise for them. I think it is inappropriate for me to be fundraising for another organization where I could be fundraising for the government. So slowly, well, not slowly, drastically before I joined, I stepped down from, I would say, 99% of my international involvements. And the one that you referred to, I will be stepping down from this year. In any case, it just involves a couple of hours of meeting twice a year. So it's not a drain on my time.
So you're going to be passing on the baton of the chairmanship of the
United Nations Universities Advisory Council to another colleague this year.
I see. So I want to now take this conversation from your personal journey towards the policy making on poverty alleviation. So I wanted to ask you the first question, and especially over here in Pakistan, the societal expectation is that we want to be an independent nation. But then at the same time, there's little understanding, or least expectation to, give your own resources to upscale the public revenue in order to enable the government in addressing the issue of poverty. I'm not saying a lot of people do not pay their taxes, they do, but there's still a significant portion of our public that does not pay taxes on their income. So how is this relationship between generating revenue for the government versus alleviating poverty?
So there are two ways of answering that question. Poverty alleviation is not all about social protection. So when you follow the example, or whenever you look at the experience of countries that have had massive success in making quantum strides in poverty alleviation, the key ingredient there has been massive growth and the ability of governments to accrue the benefit of that growth equitably to populations. And that happens in a context of sound policy, ease of business, law and order, and many other overarching factors to go with that. So growth, inclusive growth, and the ability of governments to accrue the benefits of that growth equitably to populations, and not just for that wealth to remain concentrated in the hands of few individuals or cartels, is clearly one of the significant contributors to poverty alleviation. And of course, when that happens, the assumption is that you generate more revenues, you will generate more revenue as well. Indigenous revenue is very important because that creates the fiscal space and allows the government to spend on social protection and other specific targeted poverty alleviating programs, which is why, of course, there's an emphasis on of the government to improve the tax to GDP ratio. Pakistan has a low tax to GDP ratio, and clearly we all recognize that needs to be improved, because the more revenue we generate, the more fiscal space we will have to spend on infrastructure, on development initiatives, on social protection, on targeted poverty alleviation interventions. And of course, revenue is also, improved revenue is of course directly proportional to efforts aimed at targeting those segments of the society which are outside of the tax net. But on the other hand, the more economic activity there is, the more revenue would be generated. So these are all interlinked elements.
So what you're suggesting is that there is basically a very close relationship between wealth creation and then at the same time poverty alleviation. So I wanted to ask you...
Provided, I beg your pardon, provided wealth will not remain concentrated in the hands
of few.
In the hands of certain cartels, because there is also a model of wealth generation that furthers, that divides, that is divisive, that widens, that creates more inequality.
Exactly. That's where I wanted to sort of bring into the discussion the role of your ministry or your division. What is it exactly doing in order to impart skills or provide the financial assistance in order to lift people out of poverty?
So ours is the only ministry which is implementing a program. So there's a program called Ehsaas, which means compassion in our local language for your international audience. And Ehsaas has a range of different initiatives, programs, and policies which are bucketed under 4 areas. So there are interventions that are aimed at human capital development. There are others that are purely confined within the social protection lens, targeted at 14 vulnerable groups. Then there are interventions and programs within Ehsaas that focus more on livelihood creation. And then the 4th category of Ehsaas interventions thread through all the others and are more foundational in nature. And those have to do with making governance pro-poor and improving governance and enhancing transparency and effectiveness. So as I was explaining, the social protection interventions are targeted at vulnerable groups. So there are care services for orphans and the homeless and those and laborers in the informal sector. And then there are cash stipends for very poor families who can't subsist on their own. There are cash stipends for children who cannot go to school. There are scholarships for undergraduate students who are unable to pay for their education. And there are a whole host of cash interventions. There are a range of care services for, as I said, for 14 different vulnerable groups. But to your question, there are also interventions which allow, I don't like to use the word poor, but it does not have a proper synonym. So there are services which enable the poor to come out of poverty. For instance, we've got an interest-free loan program, which is like a cash for work program. If a small street vendor wants $300 to upscale his vending cart, have additional material brought on board, there's an easy window for him or her to go to. Similarly, there's a program called Amdan, Ehsaas Amdan, which means Ehsaas income, where we give assets, relatively low value assets, which help to promote livelihoods. It could be a sewing machine, it could be livestock, it could be material for a small shop, it could be a welding machine. So these 2 interventions are more focused on livelihood creation within the spectrum of the programs that we have. And the Ehsaas undergraduate scholarship is very empowering in terms of lifting families out of poverty, because as you would know, undergraduate education, the lack of undergraduate education is one of the foremost barriers that poor families face in using education as a lever to come out of poverty. So so our scholarships are deeply empowering for underprivileged families, especially for girls, because when an underprivileged family has the choice to either send a boy or the girl to college, they inevitably opt for the boy. So there is a mix of mutually reinforcing interventions throughout the life course aimed at different groups. And because Ehsaas is such a wide landscape with so many different actions, initiatives, policies, programs, there is a theory of change through which all of them are linked. So we know which inputs support which outputs, where the foundational programs are.
Right. And I was also looking at, you mentioned of Ehsaas, and I was looking at your website, and I also saw one section where it says that Ehsaas is inviting pledges from the non-governmental organizations. Just to expand on my understanding and also for the audience, could you slightly unpack, are these pledges only confined to financial pledges, or is there more to it than just financial pledges?
Now, in terms of contributions, we have already set up a platform, a donation management platform, which provides visibility of where your donation will go. So if you contribute 50,000 rupees or $1,000 or whatever the case is, you will have your own login page, and you will be able to follow where your donation has gone.
Has this ever been done in the government before?
This has not been done in the, at least in Pakistan before, because the tendency, there are lots of organizations that do valuable work that subsist entirely on donations. But the usual model is to get wholesale donations and then to apportion part of that to the operating cost and to use the remainder for the social welfare side. But usually there isn't the visibility of what kind of operating cost you are charging. You may be charging a 30% or a 40%, and there's no visibility of that. So as yourself contributing 50,000, you have no visibility of where those monies have gone, except for that audited statement, which gives you audited accounts of an aggregated nature on a yearly basis. We want to change that in Ehsaas. Already there is a huge appetite to contribute to Ehsaas. I get emails and WhatsApp notifications and all kinds of messages saying that we want to contribute to Ehsaas, but I have put all those, very kind individuals on hold till such a time that we've got the platforms ready, till such a time that I'm able to demonstrate to them where their donation has gone in terms of the last penny.
Right.
So that mechanism is partly complete. And once it is officially all up and running, we will announce it and then look forward to volunteers like yourselves to spread the word.
Definitely. So is there like any timeline in the mind that you're expecting or that you've set
by
out
December,
for the team?
Hopefully.
By December 2021, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So I wanted to, you did mention of transparency, and I wanted to take the discussion from there, especially on the component of digital literacy. I just saw it in the news that your division is working towards promoting digital literacy among women in order to overcome these issues of charging of illegal commission by middlemen who often siphon off money from these beneficiaries by charging them amounts like 500 from the total amount that they receive. How is your division working to overcome this issue? Like, what kind of novel approach to digital literacy is your team applying to make sure these women who often have issues with textual literacy itself would be better off able in using the platforms to make sure that, they get the money that the government is handing out to them?
That's a very good question. Let me put more granularity on the issue that you outlined, because your viewers might not be fully aware of that, and then we can talk about the solution and how digital and financial literacy plays into that. So, through one of Ehsaas's programs, we push out a lot of cash to almost 30% of the country's population. During COVID, we reached out to 40% of the country's population.
Emergency cash support program.
Yes. So the Ehsaas Emergency Cash Instrument and Ehsaas Kifalat is the cash instrument where we've identified families who need support, and we push out cash through two commercial banks who have branchless banking agents. These are essentially shopkeepers at little kiosks at grocery stores who've got a side business, and they've got these gadgets through which women come and do a biometric verification, which is the thumbprints are verified in real time, and then they are supposed to be given the cash that the government has already put into their accounts. Now, there are pockets of trouble within the country. So, in South Punjab, in interior Sindh, we face, I wouldn't say that it's omnipresent. We have lots of good retailers working with us as well. Lots of God-fearing people who will make sure that women get their full due. But there are complaints of individuals who will either force these women to give them 200, 500. And sometimes we even have complaints of the police getting complicit because they see that there's a lot of cash being doled out at the center, and that the retailers are charging. So they want the piece of that pie. Now, how are we trying to counter this? In the short term, we focus on, and I make a lot of appearances on television and videos trying to explain to these women that nobody is mandated to charge you a fee. Secondly, we work with banks to try to overcome this problem. Thirdly, we work with our law enforcing agencies. Our staff in the field is directed to take strict action. We mobilize FIA whenever we find, a trouble hotspot. There's very strict punitive action. There's strict accountability of the staff if we find them complicit. So that's one line of action that we are pursuing. Alongside, there's a more I don't want to say long-term, but a slightly more medium-term agenda for reform, which is centered on changing our payment model. And by that change, we mean that the women beneficiaries and the men beneficiaries of Ehsaas in the near future will not have to rely on these retailers only. They will be serviced in banks like you and I are. Because we maintain accounts in banks, we go to bank branches, we have checkbooks, we have an instrument of our choice, whether it's a debit card or a credit card or whether it's a checkbook. And we try and, so we are aiming for a transition in our payment system predicated on the understanding that will bring greater security, choice, and more dignity for these women. But one of the things on the shorter term plan that I forgot to mention was that we have, over the last year and a half, we've introduced payments at biometric ATMs, which are a lot more secure.
Okay.
So when a woman goes and she does a biometric at the ATM and she knows how to do that, she will take the full amount of money without an agent having to exploit her there. Of course, it's an uphill task because we're talking about a segment of the population which is largely illiterate. But there is a ray of hope as well because the penetration of the feature phone is very high in these communities. So even the amma in the remotest village will surprise you because she will have a small feature phone in her, in the pocket of her vest. I consistently see it. And if not, she certainly will have, a phone number tied to her dupatta. So very often they open the knot in the dupatta, and when they open the knot, they will take out a little parchi with the phone number written on it. Why do I refer to this? Because this is a huge opportunity. The penetration of the phone is very pervasive. We recently conducted a study exactly to get a deeper understanding of how we could better position our digital and financial literacy interventions. Because for us, digital and financial literacy go hand in hand. And there was a very, I would say, surprising perspective, a surprising perspective which ought to have been common sense, but which I and my colleagues never thought of. And the insight was that in order to reach these women beneficiaries who are the recipients of your grants, your best bet is to target their children. Because the children are recipients of the education stipends as well. They are more literate. Understandably, they're more literate.
But you mean to say they're digital natives compared to their
absolutely.
parents?
That's a more elegant way of articulating it. And the finding was that our entry point should be their children, especially girls.
Right.
And you probably know that in the Ehsaas ecosystem, we give a higher stipend amount for girls.
Interesting.
Across all our interventions, whether it is the education school stipends or whether it is our health and nutrition condition cash transfer program, the girl gets a higher stipend than the boy, which is, and I'm slightly digressing from what your question was, but that is really helping to signal the importance of the girl child. Because we talk about women, but we don't talk about the girl child. So in the context of digital literacy, financial literacy, empowerment, and vesting the future of your interventions, we find the girl child one of the most valuable assets in our ecosystem.
That's quite interesting. Just a personal reflection. I remember I wrote a paper on internet governance, and it was basically focused towards creating a better ecosystem for our digital economy. And in that, I suggested two interventions. One of them was actually focused towards incentivizing girls' education by providing stipends that you just pointed out to right now. And I think measures like these would actually provide overall social incentives for the families to make sure that they get their girls educated, and overall we're better off in creating a literate population in the country.
Well, so when our government took over, there was a previous program running for the last 5 years, which centered on providing children very small school type stipends. The stipend amount was the same for girls and boys up to the 5th grade.
Okay.
A paper-based program with a lot of abuse, a lot of pilferage, running in a few districts, and very little digitization, all the work outsourced, very unpredictable outcomes. We've massively reformed that program. So we made it end-to-end digital. We've hired personnel, hired motorbikes to run it internally, developed a PMU. And then we upscaled it to, and as a result of all these changes, we brought the operational cost down from 8% to 3%. We scaled it up nationwide from 50 districts to 160 districts. And then one of the key changes we brought was that we increased the amount of stipend, increased the stipend amount, but we doubled it for girls. So people could not believe in communities that, here is a girl that we don't even look at. And if we send her to school, we are going to get double the amount. It was an unbelievable change in the community. Then we announced incrementally, once we had established the infrastructure and we had reformed the program and scaled it up, we announced that any girl who's going to do the 5th grade, we will give her a bonus amount.
Interesting.
And then we upscaled it from 5th grade to 12th grade. And throughout, the stipend policy is the same. The girl gets a higher amount.
Interesting.
And then, of course, after the 12th grade is the Ehsaas undergraduate scholarship. So today, every Ehsaas eligible family, there is a life cycle hand holding from the primary school right down to the undergraduate level, and we even have some postgraduate scholarships for students from Ehsaas families. It has, and I'm just explaining to you the transition that has happened in one program, and there are several Ehsaas programs in which, and some we have developed from scratch, conceptualized, piloted, upscaled, taken up nationwide. This last 3 years has been, we've put in an extensive amount of work, because on the one hand, we developed an entire program, and a government program is a very complex thing to conceptualize and develop, especially when it's multifaceted and multi-component. So we developed the program. We developed the digital infrastructure for its execution. We developed the institutional infrastructure for its execution. We created the expert communities. We developed a new governance backbone, a governance and integrity policy, and not just the policy, a mechanism to track it. So the governance observatory. Then we created a delivery unit to track all the different initiatives under the Ehsaas umbrella. And then program by program for different target groups, conceptualized, piloted, seeded it, taken it to scale. And in every program, there were complex procurements and human resource hiring, and lots of difficult decisions, and contracting and partnering and dealing with the provinces in this very complex federal provincial polity that we have. And then all those, now very recently we've almost completed our national socioeconomic survey. So alongside all these things, we were also doing Pakistan's first digital census, collecting socioeconomic information from every household. Mm-hmm. And in fact, last year, our one window policy has been approved, which means consolidating all this diverse ecosystem of programs and consolidating its delivery through one window. The prototyping the center, the physical center on where it's going to be executed, making arrangements for its scale up in every district and tehsil, the one window interfacing of the digital backend, the digital front end, the apps, the data consolidation, and the policy that threads through this entire landscape. So hopefully I would like that by the time the tenure of our government finishes, we would have transformed the social protection landscape in this country completely, riding on a new database, and at the front end, the one window services, the different programs in between, and a biometrically ascertainable eligibility system. Any individual in Pakistan would be able to check their eligibility online, would know what services they are entitled for, and would have the ability to take benefit in every tehsil from the services. The different elements of that ecosystem are almost complete.
Right.
And hopefully over the next 6 months, we are going to continue to consolidate it and incrementally expand.
Right. I want to speak about one more initiative that your government, under your leadership, has actually undertaken, and that is of Panahgahs. I'm sure those watching us right now may not know the term, but it actually means shelter homes. So most of these shelter homes across the country are, if I have it correctly, are catering to men primarily. I'd like you to go ahead and briefly explain to us what's the rationale behind it, and what could the government do in order to benefit women from the similar social economic strata to have an equal opportunity to make sure that they get a better shot at life,
So I'll explain the question about women, but allow me to explain to you what a Panahgah is, how that concept evolved, and where we are. So the Prime Minister, I think the credit of the concept of the Panahgah and where it is today, the credit 100% goes to the Prime Minister. And it all started back in the winter of 2018 when our government was new in office, and the Prime Minister was, when winter set in and he was on his visits, he would go to, he observed that a lot of men who would come to cosmopolitan cities to, for daily wage labor, were actually sleeping on footpaths and in parks and the reason why that happens is because there are lots of disadvantaged in economic activity terms. There are lots of districts in the country where there isn't enough economic activity. So people from the former tribal areas, from the far-flung districts will come to major cities for daily wage labor because that's where the construction is happening, that's where all the labor is required. They work during the day, at night they have nowhere to go. Those of them who are slightly better off will pool in money and take a little shanty room, but the others will basically sleep on footpaths.
True.
And this has been our society's blind spot for decades. And then back in 2020, he asked the Division of Poverty Alleviation to step in to develop standards, quality standards, to give dedicated responsibility. So one of our institutions, which is within the ecosystem of my ministry, which is responsible for care services, under the directions of the Prime Minister, was given the mandate of looking after the Panahgah. So we developed standards. And if you go to some of the Islamabad Panahgahs, they operate like one-star bed and breakfast facilities. Of course, these are difficult settings to manage from a housekeeping perspective. So there are gaps that we are constantly striving to fulfill. And the directions of the Prime Minister are very clear that these settings should offer good quality and they should offer dignity to these men who have literally been the blind spot for ages.
So it certainly is one initiative that I could see is gaining traction with the daily wage earners. But I still wanted to ask you, is the government planning to do something for the women also?
The women, yes.
Yes.
So because as I explained earlier, Ehsaas has interventions for different target groups. Now, women, the daily wage phenomena does not apply so much to women. But this notwithstanding, we have a women's section in every Panahgah.
Okay, all right.
So if a woman comes, if a student comes and wants an overnight stay, if a man is accompanied by a woman member of the family, she will have a place to stay. There is a much smaller section for women in every Panahgah.
Right. And I now want to take the discussion slightly, quite very briefly, to the working culture that you have at the division. How do you go about solving the complex and the myriad problems that you have in terms of, alleviation of the poverty? I want to ask the work culture that you've created over here under your leadership to solve these problems. What are you doing differently over here as we were talking earlier, by harnessing your previous experience?
Well, in terms of harnessing my previous experience, I think I have an advantage because a major part of my professional life I've been in the civil society. So I understand the dynamics of the grassroots, I understand the civil society. And when you found institutions on your own, you develop certain skill sets. And especially when you found institutions in a very resource-scarce environment, you have to know a little bit of everything because that's how you've navigated things. And I found out that experience comes in very handy when you manage very large organizations because you've managed the auditor, you've sat with the accountant, you know about websites, you know a little bit about IT, you know about project design, because you've had to learn. You didn't have huge managers and huge establishments working for you. So because I founded an organization from scratch, no matter how small it was, there were skills that I was forced to learn. And those skills are coming in very handy when I sit with my teams, because I know what to ask from the very senior IT person. I know what to ask from the project management side, and it gives you an advantage when I sit with the auditor. I know exactly which buttons to push. When the external auditor comes, I know what they're going to ask. So as I said, that's one advantage I think I have. Secondly, because I've extensively engaged in the international system, there's another perspective that I can draw on as well. Because I'm an academic and come from a research background also, the evaluation side, the M&E side, the building in of, the structuring and pegging in of evaluation designs into projects, the conceptualization of projects is something I'm familiar with. I'm trying my best, and there's always room to learn. But there's some other learnings also which I have from my previous life, which I'm deeply applying to my work in the government. For example, the importance of integrity and transparency. I deeply believe that in order to make things work, you have to found them on the right. You have to do the right things, but also for the right reasons. You have to deeply root the design of interventions in integrity and transparency. And that's something I've learned over the course of the years, which that's thinking and practice I've brought to the government. The discipline of hard work, the discipline of time management. I mean, you lose half an hour in a day, you're not going to come back on course on that day. So the discipline of time management, which is why we have a delivery unit. Everything is time-stamped, broken down into months. Then I break it further down into weeks and days and hours. And if you do not do that, you are unable to manage complexity. The management of complexity has to, a lot of the management of complexity is about discipline and about managing yourself. And in Ehsaas, in these operations, we've got a massive range of interventions at any one given time. If I look at my day-to-day, in the morning I was speaking to the teams where 3 years of work is now coming to fruition in terms of completion of the survey, in terms of scale up of assistance to 10 million people. That's a separate conversation. And last night I've thought through what I'm going to ask them and which buttons I'm going to push. Then I sat with another team. 2 years of work, getting upscaled in a new social protection initiative. And I knew which were the time-consuming things that I was going to drill down into. Mm-hmm. Another meeting was on the commodity subsidies initiative, a very nascent program where the Prime Minister's directives are to upscale it nationally in the shortest possible time. And the complexity of bringing that to close. I'm walking to 2 other meetings where similar. So what I'm trying to say is that you need to manage yourself. You need to manage time. You need to have a clear vision. You need to have broken down that vision into components. You need to be clear on targets. And I think the advantage perhaps I have is because I've worked under very difficult conditions with very little resource envelopes. And when you do that, you organize yourself. You're forced to organize yourself.
You spoke of having worked with the civil society. Your division is also working with a number of non-governmental organizations. I wanted to ask, does the division plan on having more crowdsourcing initiatives, particularly to inviting different policy solutions and also with respect to volunteering services?
So three aspects to what you said. In terms of volunteer services, yes, we are in the we're in the process of developing one, trying to find the best possible way of engaging, the diverse group of individuals who very kindly express an interest to work with us. Number two, crowdsourcing ideas. You referred to the pledges on our website earlier. I was very excited to source ideas from the private sector, but in the government system, in order to take an idea to scale, requires 1,000 steps. And it is not that we do not find them useful, but you are on the course to upscaling X number of things, and then suddenly you're bombarded with so many different ideas. And so in the government system, you have to look at your capacity to take things at scale as well.
So do you think there's a need to ease things up, like remove some of these bottlenecks which become impediments in applying these really good ideas to solving these problems?
Well, ideas fall into different categories. So I have a habit of listening to people. I read communications that are sent to me. I'm constantly looking at the social media for advice, and a lot of times people give very good input, which helps us in shape policy. But people also have a lot of different ideas that are very unique to their settings. Mm-hmm. I have such and such institute, and please do this. And as government, we are limited in our capacity to respond to requests that are of a very unique nature, relevant to one particular individual. There's a third component of the crowdsourcing that you were referring to, which is about donations. And we talked about our donation management platform and the system that we're developing. So I think that will be one of the most important vehicles for harnessing the contributions and crowdsourcing them
I also wanted to ask you, in Pakistan, it oftentimes has been seen, or it happens when there are good initiatives launched by any government, the successors often scale them down. What kind of measures is the government and your division is putting in place to make sure that whatever good and long-term initiatives that are being undertaken at the division are actually owned by your successors or by any future political leadership that perhaps takes the reign from there?
So the Ehsaas's operations are very apolitical. If you look at data and statistics, because we give a lot of breakdown, you will see that it is that Ehsaas's operations are not used as a tool of political patronage, which sadly has been the case in the past. And even when we were running Ehsaas Emergency Cash, which was a very large program last year, Sindh, the province of Sindh, got the maximum assistance because presumably poverty is highest there. So there is a fairly deep understanding that these operations are apolitical, and I have every expectations that the next incoming government, if it is not ours, is not going to dismantle this.
All right. And my last question is, what are the three values? I mean, envisioning towards the future, especially to our theme, looking towards the future in 2050, what are the three values, or any three values that you would suggest that we should perhaps own, and we could start cultivating them from today, collectively and individually?
Well, you mean values in terms of personal attributes, or in terms of institutional attributes? But I guess there's a lot of
I think you can cover both of them if you want to.
I would say integrity is definitely one, and integrity is not in the conventional sense of the word. It's intellectual integrity as well. Secondly, I would say humility is a very important attribute. A 30 discipline.
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am, for having graced us with the opportunity to provide us with your valuable input and for having this conversation. I hope the audience will indeed benefit from this. And thank you once again.
Thank you. I've enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for listening to this conversation. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more podcasts and let me know in the comments below, how do you envision Pakistan in 2050? Thank you.